So it's my view that if we're going to go through a serious energy transition, we need startups to drive that. And importantly, the founders sat behind them. Because realistically, you have huge amounts of capital being deployed by large energy companies, but you need the innovative ideas to be driven by someone who has the energy to push it through to fruition.
Niall, I completely agree. And I'm going to say, even more broadly than just startups, we need entrepreneurship. And that's within multiple institutions, multiple organizations, not just startups. And for the startups that do exist, we really need to rethink how those are funded, because we need patient capital, we need different business models in order to address the hard tech and financing challenges that exist in the energy transition.
Your trusted source for information on the energy transition. This is the Insider's Guide to Energy podcast.
I'm really excited today that you turned around the microphone because, of course, as podcast hosts, we're all sitting here saying, this is fun, but what about me? What about my journey? Why don't I get... So I'm thrilled because I actually, Niall, Chris, I don't get to hear about your journeys because you're the hosts. And I really want to learn more about your journeys and inspirational stories and your scars from the entrepreneurial journey. So, Chris, I'm really glad that you put forward this agenda today, and I'm excited to talk more about our shared entrepreneurial journeys here.
I am super excited to have this episode. We're all going to start out by at least giving a little background. Our audience may not know that all the hosts on this line today are entrepreneurs and founders. We've all founded companies, different segments, but all driving in the energy industry. So what I suggest we do is let's just go around the room and give just a real brief what it is we founded and a little background on ourselves. Niall, why don't you kick off about your company and what it is you did or do?
Sure, very happy to. Or what it is I do, yeah, quite right. So about 15 years ago, I entered the energy industry. 2004, it was around about the time in the UK when the decision was just being made that the nuclear industry was happening. So I entered the nuclear and waste management industry with a big German company called RWE. Then I went across into British Energy, operated nuclear power stations. They got bought by EDF Energy. And it was during that journey that I spent 10 years realizing I'm not very good at climbing the career ladder. So I ended up inside the innovation team of that company, which in many ways was a place where a lot of misfits and those who were perhaps on their way out of the business ended up. So I ended up running the electric vehicle team. And this was about 2016, 2017. And you could see this trend was just starting to happen. And I launched a proposition with my team at the time, and we wanted to enable people to access and use public electric vehicle charging. And what we needed was someone with a big tech play and a big aggregated network play. And we couldn't find it. And that idea stuck with me. And after about 18 months or 2 years of pushing that idea around in my head, I finally plucked up the courage to jump ship and start a small business, which today is called Paua. We're the UK's largest network of aggregated charge points, and we support businesses with finding and using public electric vehicle charging, and both doing public charging and now more recently home charging, as we basically seek to solve problems for businesses with vehicles as they go out on the road and transition to electric vehicles.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, I think it makes sense for you to go next, and I'll go last.
Neil, I'm going to echo a lot of the points so I can keep this brief, but certainly the first one is I was not a great employee, not great at climbing the corporate ladder. And so that made the decision to jump to a startup easier. But like you, found myself in a larger organization with a problem that was very nuanced, very esoteric, but wasn't being solved, and felt compelled to start a company to solve it. I'm also going to take some liberties here because I've actually started 3 companies somewhat in parallel: a consulting company, a venture-backed fintech, and a nonprofit. So I'm going to talk about each one of those, but the mission for all of these are just different ways of addressing the big problem, which is we need more renewable, clean infrastructure out in the world. And how do we get there? And there's multiple lenses, multiple ways to look at that. My current day job is at Energetic Capital, where we're rewriting the rules on perception of risk in project finance.
All right. Well, I guess that leaves me last. So I come from it a little bit different than the two of you. I come from the tech segment. I started a career starting tech companies. I early on was fortunate enough to get involved, and the internet was growing. And then we went into these other tech companies. Those are part of companies that did exits through IPOs or companies that did sale, mergers. And what I learned along the way is I love that startup culture. I love where the company is when it's early, that everybody pulling together and the feel of what you can get done when you're a small company. And I love technology. So along the way, a consultant that ran a PwC energy practice in Europe gave me a shout a few years back and said, hey, I've got this idea of a startup in the energy tech space. Would you want to come help me out with it? After I got done yawning and didn't think it was going to be that exciting, I took a week's vacation, flew over to Europe, and started interviewing companies like RWE, where you came from, Neil, and other companies, and said, hey, if we solve this problem in OTC energy trading, would that help you guys? And what I realized is there was a need in the market. And so it was just technology. It was a way to do it. I went over, helped this PwC guy out because he could understand the business problem, but he had never done startups, couldn't raise capital and things like that. He needed some experience to come do that. So I came in and built the commercial side of the business, raised our funding, and did that. At the same time, I became really passionate about energy, started Insider's Guide to Energy, just like Jeff said, kind of as a second company here. And now we've got IGTE as well. So I've recently exited the day job from the first 4 years of that company and was able to get an exit out. And now I'm helping some other small companies get started and trying to figure out what the next startup play is. Because once you're an entrepreneur and that serial entrepreneur, it is really hard to not get excited about the next big play that you're going to go do. And that's where I am right now.
So I feel like I'm letting the side down with only one startup here. But I feel the passion and enthusiasm that comes through from having done it once and knowing that you're facing failure, but you've overcome that fear of failure. And as a consequence, the ability to then take the leap a second, a third, a fourth time is huge, because after 15 years of a regular paycheck coming into your bank account, you suddenly go, hang on, is setting up a business really such a smart idea? And there is a long list of reasons why you wouldn't do it. Now, personally, I found the co-founder element of building my own business absolutely crucial. I knew as soon as I found the right co-founder that it was something I could do. I'm quite curious about you guys. Did you both? Chris, you mentioned your colleague at PwC. Is a co-founder something you've always had? And Jeff, did you always start solo, or is solo the way to go?
Typically, I've been part of a team and more on the commercial and engineering and architecture side. So I came a little bit later in most of my early companies and just got the bite of what I wanted to do. As I got more seasoned in my career and could do things on my own, I did it. I think that the co-founder is a double-edged sword. I didn't totally, part of the last company, I learned that just because I liked someone and that they had some skills, that they may not have the competence. And you get to a certain point where you're bored and your advisors are telling you one thing, and it can get really difficult. So I think you have to be very careful with your co-founder. If it's just a couple, I think when you get to a company and have a team, it's very different because your swim lane is carved out. But in those early days, you live and breathe. This is your baby. And you really need to be on board with your co-founder and trust your co-founder, because at some point, you're probably going to have slightly different visions of what your company going to be. And that needs to get resolved somehow, because your shareholders are going to want you to resolve that because they've got a lot of money riding on your decision. But Jeff, how did your co-founder experience go?
Yeah, I would just say I found it essential and have talked to a lot of friends. I think the solo founder journey is really difficult because you really need somebody to work through problems with. And I'm not saying that you're always going to agree. I think it's important that you disagree actually and have real conflict, but work through that in a respectful and collaborative way. And that's what's been most inspiring to me, is having founders where I had a longstanding friendship and foundation of respect and trust. And that is just super, super valuable as you're going through the journey.
All right. Well, I think we got a little bit about the founders. What are some of the early challenges we all had? What are some of the things that you had early on? So Neil, you left a day job to go start a company. So let's start with you, because that's got to be the biggest culture shock.
Yeah, and I've kind of mentioned a huge step in that milestone for me was having the right co-founder. One of the things that people often tell you is, you've got to get the timing right. Well, realistically, the time is never right. I had 2 kids when I started my business. I've got 3 now. So realistically, childbirth and, life events happen as you go on that journey. So the earliest thing for me was we actually founded our business in the middle of COVID. So I'd been sent home from work from my large corporate office into my spare bedroom, and suddenly realized that this kind of legitimized the whole experience of running a business out of, without an office, completely remote. And I happened to know my co-founder quite well at that time, so we variously worked through the problems, and we had to employ someone. We had to employ someone who we couldn't interview beyond, a Zoom call. And quite quickly, we'd employed our first employee. We'd set up an office. We'd, started to raise our first capital. We put together our first propositions without ever having an office. And having spent 15 years in an office with a jacket hung over the back of my chair to show that was my chair, this was a crazy, strange experience. So one of the first challenges we had was, how do you run a remote business? And quite quickly, what followed was all of what software stack to put together, what legal contracts to put in place, and all of the pains of administration of a small business that perhaps the original founder's dream didn't include. Your original dream is the first customer, the first revenue, the first story, and realistically, a lot of it is admin and hard work. And that for me was one of the biggest challenges to overcome, was how do you run a remote business and how do you get access to support and tools in that very, very early stage when realistically you've got nothing more than maybe a PowerPoint deck to show for what you're doing.
Gosh, early founding. I mean, it's hard. We were started, and I would just maybe start by saying every journey is different, and even if we were founding the same exact company today, it would be completely different. And so these are maybe experiences, but not recommendations. I'm thinking, reflecting. I think we've all had the benefit of having very supportive households, which is important. It's not just co-founders; it's the people you have around you in your home, in your personal network, to get you through those tough journeys. And I found a foundation of goodwill and people you can call on, whether they're formal advisors or friends, to just guide you or to make intros or to just be sounding boards, is really, really crucial in the early days, because you never know. And when people would ask me, Jeff, how's it going? I would say, it's going great, but I'll tell you in 6 months. And it's been 7 years of that. And I'm amazed on the one hand of how far we've gotten. And then simultaneously, there's, bigger and bigger hurdles and targets ahead of us. And will we make it? I don't know, but we're going to keep trying. And if the past is any any representation, I think we've got a really good shot.
So that exact point is what someone out of a small mentor group said to me, which is, we're going to keep going and we're going to make it, and you will find a way. You will always try and find a way to make it happen. And 100% I echo that idea, that finding a group of people who have sufficient experience, not just to say, don't worry, you're great, you're going to make it happen, because there's a lot of people out there who will just believe in you without knowing the detail, but people who really understand the minutiae going through this challenge is such an important step in giving you confidence to move forward. I'm sure you saw the same thing, Chris.
Yeah, I think so. I think the thing that resonates with me, what Jeff said, and what my family could attest to, is when you work for a startup or a young company, it 24 hours can be manically different. I mean, you can win one deal in 24 hours, or you have a prospect that looks like it's going to be amazing, or you're going to get, X million dollars in funding tomorrow, and it's great. And then you find out that there's a problem in your source code, or you find out there's something else the next day, and the world's going to come to an end. I think having done so many companies along the way, there were plenty of moments where I sat down with my co-founder, and we basically spent more time together than my family and I did for 4 years. We were in the same room. We could finish each other's sentences. We knew how the other would respond. Even if we didn't agree, we could answer for each other. But what ended up happening is there'd be a few times where it just looked like the world was coming to an end. We need funding and we're running down to, a week, 2 weeks worth of cash in the bank. And I'm like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We always do. And I said, 2 years from now, we're going to be laughing about how we got through this, or 3 years from now or some point, because in my experience, the world's always coming to an end. That Men in Black, where the original movie, where he kind of looks around and you realize the world's about to come to the end, and Tommy Lee looks back and goes, it's always about to come to the end. That's a startup. There's always high risk. But if you do what I've heard on this call already, which is put your head down and fight through it and figure out a way through it, you generally will, not all the time, but in my experience, been able to look back in the future and go back, wow, we made it through that. I can't believe we got through that. And it looked like the world was going to end. So a lot of times it's perspective. And then the second thing is, like you said, is having people on the outside that trust you and believe in you and have faith in what you're doing, even if they don't totally understand your idea. Because a lot of the investors I got very early, the friends, families, and fools, as we like to say, that gave me money, invested in me. The first few rounds of seed until we got up to real money, those were people investing in both my co-founder and myself. They thought the idea was okay and had possible legs, but if you ask any of them, they didn't invest in the company at that time. They invested in the people, and that's what they're investing in. So you got to fight through this stuff. So, all right, so we've got through kind of the early learnings of where we are. What were some of the hurdles that we had to overcome? I mean, so we all had hurdles. There had to be unique hurdles. So we're talking specifically the energy industry. There's 3 of us here that have companies in that space. Jeff, what were some of the initial hurdles you had to do with Energetic?
Gosh, this is a story of, if we had actually known how hard it was, we probably wouldn't have tried. So we're coming in, my co-founder and I, as outsiders to the insurance industry, saying we've got a novel way of underwriting risk. We built our own models, we got our own data sets, and we're coming into basically some of the largest insurance companies in the world, trying to convince them that they should put their balance sheet behind our model. And that took 2 years. It took 2 years of walking around, learning the language, flying to London. This was thankfully pre-COVID, and basically not giving up. We were able to do that actually because of a grant from the Department of Energy and the Sunshot Initiative. Without that non-dilutive financing, I don't think we ever would have gotten there. But a lot of these insurers or financial institutions, really, they don't believe you for the first 6 months of your existence. And after you've been around long enough and you haven't gone away and you haven't given up, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, now I can listen to what you're saying because I can tell you actually care about this. And so really through a process of about 2 years, just to even exist, to even sell an insurance product, that's what we had to get through. And gosh, that's I don't think we've done anything harder since then.
So Jeff, what you did is, fortunately we had a couple of really good advisors at my company, and one of our largest early investors was very patient. And we'd come in and say, 6 months from now, we're going to kill the market. We're going to have, our first blah, blah, blah contract or this or that. And then 12 months from now, when we were actually doing that contract, they'd come back and go, yeah, that's kind of what I budgeted. I kind of figured that, so having some experienced investors, but I think to be a founder, you need to be overly optimistic and either have your head in the sand and not understand the risks you're against, or just not care and think you can fight through that. So I think that's a commonality that I would share. I don't know about you, Neil, but I think that.
Yeah, there's a lot in there that I'm resonating with. I think one of the things that I spent 15 years inside energy companies, I always used to say they did really big things really slowly. And as a consequence, they need time to process internally through multiple layers of decision makers what the outcome is. And therefore, for us, we aggregate different charge point networks. And some of those charge point networks are operated by huge oil giants and huge energy companies. And latterly, they're always the last ones to join because it's the smaller, more nimble ones who we've been able to work with first. And the same thing applies to the businesses who we've been able to sell services to. It's been the smaller growth enterprises who we've been able to tackle and work with first. And therefore, it's been the more laggard, large enterprises that come more slowly. I think one of the things with entering the energy sector is you've got to find those early movers who are going to create that opportunity to get a real proof of concept, an MVP into the world. Because unfortunately, many of the big projects out there require you to be very credible, very experienced, very well backed, hundreds of ISO statements and certifications and approvals. And, just entering the supply chain process alone is a little bit of a victory. So quite quickly, you can see that it's really off-putting to work in the energy world. And with that comes, I think, an expectation from investors as to how quickly businesses can move. Because all of a sudden, if you're entering the world where you're having to do deals with some of the largest energy companies in the world, it just doesn't happen as quickly. So having, experienced investors who've had either experience in the clean tech transition or in energy investment previously becomes a hugely crucial part of helping understand that maybe things don't happen on that, nice hockey stick shaped curve as quickly as everyone would like. And unfortunately, things just take time.
So how does that drive the innovation then in our experience across the board, right? Because investors aren't always patient. They want a return, and we're competing with capital that go into other investments as well. So how's that innovation, and Jeff, in your opinion, how is this driving innovation?
So I think this goes back to my first point, which is that it might not be the right kind of capital. And it's very important at the beginning. I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs get locked into oh, there's a standard model of building a startup. It is, I have a proprietary technology that I've licensed and patented, and I go out and I raise VC dollars and I get dilution, all that stuff. But given the pace of what we've all been describing, venture capital financing may not be the right fit for these types of businesses. And I think there's at least three flavors to consider: government, which I mentioned, venture, of course, but third is customer dollars. And customer dollars are really important. The first business that I was involved in, and I was somewhat a co-founder, but also, like you said, Chris, was tapped by somebody else, which is another way of becoming a co-founder, was a consulting business. And if you look at our experiences, I think we're all B2B, and we all launched based on an experience that was a very esoteric opportunity that we only discovered by being us or somebody else, being inside a much larger corporation that couldn't innovate. So we actually built ADL Ventures to go find those opportunities. Because if you're a startup and you're trying to pitch a utility, it takes forever. If you go in as a consultant, it's a very different experience. And you are working and providing value to those large companies by helping them understand what problems they have. But then you're at the front row seat to be involved in an entity that is providing that solution, whether it's a spin out, a spin in, a licensing deal, a pilot. And so what ADL has focused on is that interface and improving the corporate startup interface, but going in asking questions before you make a pitch. And that's, I would say, is actually the best way to start a company. If you're not already in one of those large firms to spin out, that you go in as a consultant and provide the inverse pitch. Don't pitch whatever you think the answer is. Ask the question. This is Jeopardy style. Go in and get paid to ask the question for which that startup is the answer. And you learn along the way that maybe you had it right, maybe you had it wrong, but you're deepening that relationship, and that does not require venture dollars to get started.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we did with Fidectis. We started out with Germany's largest energy company, and when I told you I took a week off, I sat with them and said, "Hey, what is it you need built? What do we build?" And we built a proof of concept, very quickly. Brought the proof of concept, but even so much so that we intentionally left our UI almost like blank, and we said, "Look, we're going to have you build it." And one of our initial differentiators is our UI was built by our customers. So our first 10 users basically designed our UI with our design team. And of course, everyone in the industry is like, "Well, we've never had one that understood us," because we built what they asked us to build as opposed to just going off and building something in a vacuum. The second thing that we did, I thought that was pretty powerful. So in having done this for over 20 years, I don't believe if people don't have skin in the game, they're vested in things. So we didn't give away any of our initial technology. We charged for all our initial customers to be on trial systems. So our first revenue was 6 months before we had product. I think the first $250,000 was just based on going to a lab. And the reason we did that, one, is that obviously helped with our investors to see that there was some tolerance in the market. But the second thing is, if people don't have skin in the game, they don't give you time. So if you need someone to get you an IP address or to work in the lab, if they've made an investment, they're interested in being involved with your project. So for me, it was building, like you said, what they wanted as opposed to doing it. Having to convince energy companies, at least we started in Europe, across Europe, that they wanted to build a product as opposed to the left-handed monkey wrench. That was a bit more of a challenge because every energy company in the world, whether I'm in Houston or whether I'm in London or I'm in Switzerland, they all have their own special needs. And that's a bit of a challenge to make sure you stay on focus and be productized. That was the hard thing for our company because my co-founder wanted to build everything in the world because he had never started a company before, and saying, no, we need good enough to ship, and it needs to be just these few things on the truck today because that's what we can ship. Neil?
Yeah, I kind of came at this from the different angle. I mean, I've heard you both talk about how you've gone into the businesses, understood the expression of what it was they were facing, and then, taken that away and turned it into a product. I was inside the business when all of this started. And like I described, I kind of ended up in the innovation function. And innovation functions inside large energy companies are funny places because most times when you look at the reign of an incoming CEO, they will take the first couple of years to invest quite heavily in R&D inside the innovation ecosystem, and then slowly over that 7 to 9 year tenure of that CEO, they will shut it down, harvest the benefits, demonstrate to their shareholders what a great job they've done, and then retire on a lovely pension. So as a consequence, most innovation teams inside energy companies have a lifetime of something like 7 to 9 years. So I wasn't surprised that the innovation team I was part of is now shut down. I wouldn't be surprised to see if another one opens up in the next couple of years. But what it means is that energy companies themselves are keen on innovation, but don't necessarily know how to handle it and what to do with it. So, I mean, this all goes back to the well-written, well-studied innovator's dilemma, but ultimately big corporates don't always know what they want. So there's a dynamic in here which is quite interesting around listening to the customer and making sure that you're building for what the customer needs, but also recognizing that the customer is probably not the expert in the very niche, specific arena that you're trying to operate in. So you've got to bring a certain element of "that's great, but" type scenario to customers, which is a challenge when you're dealing with huge behemoth organizations who have their own opinion on how the world works.
So I guess if you're listening to this and you were thinking of either leaving your energy company to do a startup, or you wanted to get into it, what attributes or skills do we think collectively are there?
This is a great one, isn't it? Um, I think fundamentally, the single hardest thing to deal with if you're inside a large energy company and you're thinking about leaving to go and start a business is the risk, your attitude to risk. Um, the the entire setup inside large corporates is designed to keep good ideas inside, not to let them get out, to keep you confident and comfortable in moving up through tiers and rungs of an organization. And realistically, it's quite hard to find the opportunity to get out of that organization and then therefore also not just to leave, but to have the gumption to jump into building your own business. So you've got to have some sort of intrinsic motivation that is perhaps bigger than the pure ambition of being able to build a business. And personally, for me, there were a couple of things. One of them is my career began in the world of climate change, and therefore I always knew I wanted to build something that lived and breathed in the world of clean tech. But more importantly, there's this kind of crazy concept of what's the story you're going to tell on your deathbed. And for me, my story of working inside an energy company for my entire career was going to be a bit dull. And therefore, I had spoken to a number of other entrepreneurs before making this leap. In fact, I've been thinking about it for about 10 years. But I knew that I wanted the stories they had, the story of the moment when there is only 1 week's worth of cash left in the bank, the story of the time that something was going so well and went terribly wrong. I wanted all of those stories. And therefore, there was a little bit of me which was a no regrets decision, which was I'm not climbing the ladder at any rocket ship pace. I'm not the best employee in this ecosystem, but I perhaps have the capability and credibility to do this. So I'm going to give it a shot. And if it goes terribly wrong, what's the worst that happens? I can at least say I tried, got it horribly wrong, and then go back to the big energy company and be very comfortable, having got all the scars and the wounds from that journey. So I kind of built my own little business case, which was partially built in my head, but also, as you both mentioned, had to be built with my external stakeholders, my wife, my family as well. And we've got some trigger points at which point you go, actually, you know what, this is the end. We're not going forward. We're not moving beyond this. But we haven't hit any of them yet. It's going well. It's been a very positive story, but it's had its low periods, and managing those low periods and understanding that you're going to have them. It's the world's craziest roller coaster, but the lows are super low and the highs are super high. You've just got to manage that and be able to be resilient enough to work through that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the first thing I want to, if somebody's thinking about starting a company, the first thing I want to impart is that there is not some magical credential out there where, oh, if I just do this, then I'll be ready. And you can always invent one. like, oh, well, I need to work at this company, or I need this degree, or I need this experience or this thing. It's not true. Uh, you can be ready with what you have. You'll learn what you need along the way, or you ask for help. So that's the first one. The second one is that timing matters. So it's, yes, your personal situation, but it's more about the markets. What is the reason why now is the right time for this business? And you can get by on everything else being mediocre, but if you hit the timing right, and I think a lot of the most successful businesses today that you can find are people about being at the right time, and then everything else can attract. As far as the skills, I really think that's pretty broad. The one I would just say is it's got to be this balance of ambition and humility. You have to have enough motivation to try and do something big, but enough humility to ask for help along the way. And it's really, really hard. The people I see fail are the ones that get this mixed up. They're ambitious when they should be humble, and they're humble when they should be ambitious. And that's one of the hardest things to balance in the entrepreneurial journey. And then the last thing is, it's just ultimate. It's got to be something that you're fired up about, because of the highs and especially the lows that Niall is talking about, and just the drudgery and the boring work, and doing the books on a Sunday afternoon because somebody's got to do it, right? And if you're just not fired up about the whole thing, you're not going to make it through the slog that it is sometimes. But if you have that passion and tenacity, you can get through just about everything.
So I agree with a lot of what both you said and have some different opinions. So unlike Niall, I don't think you should have a plan B and have that safety net. I think you dive in, you go fail, and you try again. I think that there's an entrepreneurial spirit. You can't be afraid of failing. In fact, in my last startup, we would try things, and I remember we built one product line we thought was going to make us really wealthy, and of course, we didn't ship it. Right? It wasn't that great. It was only exciting to us when we took it to market. And we quickly just pivoted and did something different. So you need to be able to pivot and be flexible. Your identity can't be tied up too much. Very few startups. The last one was the only one that I would say that we didn't totally pivot from what we started to build. From the very day we opened the company, thought, hey, we're going to be this. We're going to be the energy industry's next blah. But when you find out the market and you adjust and you listen to your customers and you change, there's going to be a pivot. So you can't get too hung up exactly on the details. The second thing I really love is the people and the culture. The reason I like doing it, and I matched my career to a couple of friends of mine that had long careers in large companies and stayed their entire career. So economically, we did about the same. I had more ups and downs. They were like the slow rabbit, the rabbit in the hare kind of thing, and the tortoise, and they did well in the end, but we had different excitement levels. So you have to have the tolerance to be able to go risk everything and then start again. And it may fail and not go the way you want, but you need to do that. And the last thing I think you need to do is know when to cut the cord and try something different. Because in a startup, if you're truly optimistic, there's always that one deal that's going to make it better. And you need to know when it's time to cut bait, because there's a time where you're chasing bad ideas. And this is where the advice and listening to your colleagues and having trusted people. The one thing I highly recommend is getting advisors you trust. The biggest rookie mistake I've seen, and I saw it even in my last company because I co-founded with someone that wasn't an experienced startup guy, is trying to be greedy and keep too much and not trusting a board and putting a viable board in place that you actually listen to and trust, because they've done it. And that's where when you get to equity and things like that, and Jeff, the model may be different with government and other funding, but one of the things equity can do, even though you got to be really careful because their vested interest is in their pocketbook, not necessarily in your personal well-being, but they know how to run a business and stuff like that, and they give you a lot of insight and things to look at and experience. So those are the things I look at that are there. As we bring this together, I think we should probably close pretty soon because we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts around the horn? Now, I think Niall, you opened, so Jeff, why don't you go first on the final thoughts here?
Gosh, I do think actually that having a fallback is helpful. And I want to give some credit here to just the state of Massachusetts. Like the fact that there was mass health, and that I could not have a job and start a company and know that I had health insurance, or, at least as a fallback, or there's unemployment insurance. I do think that these kind of, whether it's a, savings built up, or a spouse, or public programs, having those conceptually as, not that you necessarily need them, but that they're there as fallbacks, does allow risk taking to occur. And I think that's super important. One thing that I'll just reflect on, my wife is a doctor, and so no matter what I did, she was always working more hours than I was. No matter what I did, how bad I thought my day was, she never said this, of course, but it's implicit. Oh, well, did anybody die on your shift? Right? No. Did anybody threaten to sue you today? Did you have to like talk to a family member who had just experienced the most traumatic event of that? No. Oh, okay. And then, similarly, I had another friend who had served in the military, and I asked him why he was so cool, calm, and collected. And he said, Jeff, you know what? Nobody's trying to kill me today, right? Nobody's shooting at me. So I think it puts it in perspective. These are hard things, but we will survive. There are harder things that we ourselves and our friends and other people, our peers, are capable of and do every day. And so that should give us a sense of ultimate possibility. And it's that drive, the optimism, the tenacity. And yes, you can get down, you can feel depressed, and you should feel depressed. If you never feel disappointed, then you never make it better. And if you never feel optimistic, then you never try. And so it's all about what I call this productive cycle of the highs and the lows, and using each one of those to build momentum through the next cycle.
All right, Neil, I'm going to let you have the final word because we're coming up along on time. So you got the final word today.
One of the things that I have, and maybe this is the humility point that Jeff is talking to, but one of the things that I have found supremely useful on this journey is the willingness that other people have had to give advice and guidance on this journey, and the reminder to myself that I need to go and ask for it at certain times, because you will not know everything you need to know as you go out on this journey, and therefore your one of your primary jobs is to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, particularly about your customers and your market, before you run out of money. And therefore being able to be confident to speak to people and go, listen guys, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do with this problem, that problem, is amazing. And therefore having that peer group, mentorship group around you becomes absolutely crucial. But at all times, managing your own personal energy and positivity and attitude to what you're trying to do is really key. And on top of that, there's a massive question about risk appetite. And I think if you've got the right combination of risk appetite, you can pull together your vision and your values, and you can express them in the form of a company which can do good and shape the world for a better place. Then personally, I would say to everyone, why not have a shot? And it might not be for everyone, but realistically, it is one of these things that Jeff kind of alluded to, which is there is no special qualification. As they said in Kung Fu Panda, there is no secret ingredient. It's kind of up to you.
Well, I'm glad that you got your advice from a cartoon. That's amazing. But I hope the audience has enjoyed this episode. We're trying to give you a glimpse behind the curtain. You've got 3 hosts that were on the show regularly. We're always interviewing people. Add comments, add questions, go to the YouTube channel, make sure you add comments. Because if you ask a lot of questions and things like that, we'll do another episode like this. We'll go into whatever you want to know. We're happy to talk more. This has been really fun, guys. I want to thank you for spending the time today and sharing with the audience. And thanks.
Cheers. Really enjoyed it.
For audience, we hope you've enjoyed another episode of the Insider's Guide to Energy. We're going to see you again next week. And don't forget to subscribe and get on our YouTube channel. Like I said, you want more of this, you want to have specific questions answered of how we did what, put them up on the YouTube channel and you'll get the answers. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.